It's difficult not to notice rising food prices when you walk into a grocery store. Packages are also growing smaller, as you've probably realized if you've ever used classic recipes that require any kind of boxed or canned ingredient. Going to the grocery store will soon exhaust your financial resources. Not only are basics like eggs, beef, and milk becoming more costly, but Coca-Cola and PepsiCo have also announced price hikes as a result of increased supply chain and labor issues. The amount by which the cost of each product type will rise is determined by the supplier, the location, and how far the items have gone through the supply chain to reach you. Nonetheless, some 2022 and 2023 food inflation estimates have already given us a solid indication of how much fruit, dairy, meat, snacks, sauces, and other restaurant essential goods will cost. Let's have a look at the most recent findings. What's causing inflation in 2022? If you've been paying attention to current events and your shopping basket, you probably noticed that prices are rising. A liter of unleaded petrol costs more now than it did a year ago. Electricity and gas prices have risen, and even potato chips and soft drinks are becoming much more expensive. Food costs are expected to climb 5% in the first half of 2022, according to the Wall Street Journal, whereas other agencies predict a 7% increase by the end of the year. This figure might be even higher, given that many items are diminishing in size, meaning that you're getting less for your money. So why are prices increasing now? Inflation is the only answer, and it isn't just occurring in one nation. Plenty of countries around the world are facing what some are labeling an inflation crisis. The increase of prices for products and services is referred to as inflation. Supply and demand play a big role in inflation. Many regions throughout the world are experiencing high inflation, and the pandemic is one of the main causes. When COVID-19 hit, countries everywhere around the world were thrown into lockdowns, with industries and workplaces closing and many companies ceasing to operate. Most governments stepped in at this point to make huge investments and stimuli in order to keep people out of poverty and keep businesses viable. Many families built up surprisingly large savings as a consequence of fewer possibilities to purchase, such as while working from home when stores were closed. When restrictions were lifted, these funds flooded into the economy just as expected. When people have a bunch of extra spending cash and buy a lot of something, the price of that thing goes up because it's much more complicated for suppliers to match that demand. Inflation is also aggravated by supply chain issues. The trouble is that there haven't been enough things to go around, since many nations still have severe COVID-19 laws, lack vaccine availability or uptake, or cycle in and out of lockdowns. There are fewer firms operating with fewer people, creating fewer goods. Despite the abundance of cash, businesses are unable to keep up, and prices are rising as a result. Aside from the pandemic itself, the pandemic's aftermath is currently harming food prices. According to the New York Times, the pandemic led to a significant labor scarcity, supply shortages, price rises, and a variety of other issues that have resulted in higher food expenses. Another big reason for inflation is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is impacting the food supply chain. Several of the world's food goods, such as wheat, are supplied by Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is also a major port for cargo ships transporting products throughout the world. However, the ports have been blocked due to the conflict. Ukraine and Russia account for around 10 and 20% of world wheat output, respectively, so almost 30% of all wheat exports. As a result, Ukraine's output, or shortage thereof, has an impact on world food security. Although Ukraine has historically been a reliable provider, we've observed global limitations have an influence on food security in the past. Increased wheat prices mean higher food prices for everyone. Inflationary pressures aren't limited to risks to wheat shipments. Russia is also a significant exporter of practically every type of fertilizer at a reasonable cost. It's difficult to overestimate the importance of fertilizer in the food supply chain. Fertilizers are responsible for nearly every kind of food you eat. If global commerce is affected, farmers throughout the world will face increased expenses and, as a result, higher food inflation. This means that rises in wheat prices will have a considerable influence on the cost of wheat-based goods. Which food items will be the most expensive? As high inflation rates and supply chain concerns continue to destabilize the market, prices for everything from snack foods like Jell-O and cookies to basic products like milk and coffee are projected to climb. When COVID outbreaks prompted the closure of multiple facilities, meat prices began to rise shortly in the pandemic. In addition, the industry's lack of competition, only 4 corporations handle the majority of America's meat processing, has allowed costs to keep rising. Due to supply chain and labor concerns, both Coca-Cola and PepsiCo have announced price increases. In addition to their well-known sodas, both companies sell famous juices, teas, and waters. In 2022, food costs are predicted to hit new highs. So how will this affect your consumption basket? Let's look at some of the critical goods and components that are likely to become more costly as a result of continued supply chain challenges. Prices for basic goods, such as potatoes and celery, are expected to rise due to greater freight expenses, while alcoholic drinks such as beer, liquor, and wine will rise due to labor shortages and delays in importing commodities. So now you must be thinking about making dinner reservations rather than cooking dinner. Be careful, don't expect it to be any less expensive. Restaurant prices are also rising. Restaurants are suffering the same pressure on food prices as customers, owing to transportation and raw material issues. Starbucks has experienced trouble obtaining a variety of menu items, including flavored syrups and chai tea bags. Furthermore, labor conditions have compelled the sector to boost salaries. Many restaurants are also incurring new costs that were not previously anticipated, such as storing personal protective equipment, collaborating with third-party delivery services, and maintaining outside eating areas. Are there any signs of stabilizing food prices? If you think grocery expenses are out of hand now, prepare yourself because your visits to the store are about to get considerably more costly in the coming year. Prices for just about everything, from dairy goods, bread, and fruit, to sweets, snacks, condiments, and booze, are likely to rise even further in 2022. COVID-related supply and labor concerns are still creating chaos in the restaurant business at the start of 2022. Inflation will continue to drive up food prices, meaning that everything from growing to shipping to purchasing food is becoming more costly and will continue to do so in the coming months. Chefs and restaurant owners may have to make difficult decisions about procuring goods and reconsidering menu prices as a result of this. According to the Food Price Index, published by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, which measures a basket of basics, global food prices reached their highest point since July 2011. Higher food costs, particularly wheat, have contributed to the price increase. Agriculture futures markets have witnessed significant gains as well. According to the Wall Street Journal, the cost of coffee in the U.S. has increased by more than 82% since the beginning of the year, while wheat has increased about 26% and sugar by almost 24%. Inflation is expected to continue rising. As per the January World Economic Outlook report, price increases this year will reach 3.9% in advanced nations and 5.9% in emerging markets and developing economies before easing in 2023. Rising inflation will diminish when supply chain issues lessen, central banks boost interest rates, and consumption shifts back to services rather than goods-intensive spending, providing inflation expectations stay stable and the pandemic as well as the Ukrainian war ultimately loosen their grip. Crude oil prices are expected to grow 12% this year, while natural gas costs are expected to surge by 58%. Both commodities will see prices rise, but they will be far smaller than the previous year's gains, and prices will likely decline in 2023 as supply-demand instability is less. Food costs, however, are expected to grow at a more conservative rate of roughly 4.5% this year before declining next year, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, after rising by 23.1% the year before. This will also relieve expenditure constraints for millions of people all across the world, particularly in low-income nations. What can you do if food prices keep rising? Food prices are rising, but that doesn't mean you have to spend more than you can spare. You can save money on groceries by swapping in generic brands for brand products. In a tasting test, it is difficult to tell the difference between an Oreo and a generic cream cookie. While the pandemic conditioned many to purchase online, you may be able to save money by shopping in person. When it comes to how much you should spend on food, most specialists advise that you pay no more than 50% of your monthly income on groceries, housing, and other necessities. If you do notice an increase in your food expenditure, apply for a credit card that offers rewards at grocery shops and supermarkets, so you can at least receive bonus points for your increased spending. So what are your thoughts on this? Have you considered some ways to manage your bills during this period of high inflation? Share with us your thoughts by leaving a comment. What else would you like us to talk about in our upcoming videos? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our videos.